The envelope had no stamp. That was the first thing Dominic Reyes noticed when he walked into the laundry room at 6:47 in the morning and found it lying on the tile floor beside a worn black flat, its toe curling upward like a question. The shoe was small, a woman's shoe, size 6, maybe 6.5. The sole was separating at the heel, sealed back with a thin line of clear adhesive that had been applied carefully, deliberately, the way someone applies a bandage to a wound they can't afford to have looked at. The envelope had been folded in half and tucked inside the shoe's lining, but it had slipped out sometime in the night or in the early morning dark, and now it lay open on the cold tile, one corner lifting slightly in the draft from the ventilation grate above. Dominic stood in the doorway for 7 seconds without moving. Then he crossed the room, crouched down, and picked it up. He did not open it. Not yet. He held it in his hand and looked at the shoe and felt something shift in the back of his chest, the way a foundation shifts before a wall cracks. He had not felt that particular sensation in a very long time. He set the envelope on top of the dryer and went to make his coffee and told himself it had nothing to do with him. He read the first line at 7:03, while his espresso was still hot enough to burn. He put the letter down and left the room. Her name was Celia Varga, and she had been cleaning this house for 11 months. She arrived every morning at 6, let herself in through the side entrance with the key that had been handed to her without ceremony by a man named Pharaoh who worked for Dominic and never smiled. She wore the same 3 blouses in rotation, a navy one, a gray one, and a pale green one with a small stain above the left pocket that she had tried to remove so many times the fabric had gone thin and soft in that spot, like skin that had been scrubbed too hard. She kept her dark hair pinned back. She moved through the house quietly, not the quiet of timidity, but the quiet of someone who had learned that occupying less space was a form of survival. She cleaned the East Wing on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, the West Wing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Saturdays she deep-cleaned the kitchen and the 2 formal dining rooms that were never used but were always, inexplicably, dusty. Sundays she did not work here. On Sundays, she took the 7:18 bus to the laundromat on Carrillo Street, washed her 3 blouses and her 2 pairs of trousers and her daughter's clothes, and sat in the plastic chair by the window with her hands folded in her lap, and stared at the dryers spinning and thought about things she could not afford to say out loud. She had a daughter named Pilar who was 8 years old. Pilar had her mother's dark eyes and her father's stubborn chin, though Celia no longer said the second part aloud either. They lived in a 1-bedroom apartment on the 3rd floor of a building on Mendy Street, where the elevator had been broken for 4 months, and the super had stopped returning calls. Pilar slept in the bedroom. Celia slept on the pull-out sofa, which had a bar that pressed into the small of her back all night, every night, and which she had learned to sleep around by lying slightly to one side, her body tilted at a 5-degree angle, like a person leaning into a permanent wind. She kept a tin on the top shelf of the kitchen cabinet, behind the box of dried lentils. The tin had a picture of shortbread cookies on the lid, though it had never held shortbread cookies in the 3 years she had owned it. It held money. Specifically, it held the money she was saving to bring her sister here. Her sister's name was Marisol. Marisol was 23 years old and lived in a city 400 miles southeast of here, in a situation that Celia did not describe to anyone, because there were no words in her vocabulary that felt adequate to describe it, without also describing her own failure to fix it sooner, faster, better. The tin currently held $214. She needed $1,400. She had been saving for 19 months. Dominic Reyes was 54 years old, and he had controlled the Western District for 11 years. He was not a large man in the way that intimidated people immediately. He was not the kind of broad-shouldered presence that filled a doorway. He was medium height, lean, with dark eyes that sat deep beneath a heavy brow and hands that were unexpectedly still. The hands of a man who had long ago learned that stillness was more threatening than movement. His voice was low, not soft. Low, the kind of low that didn't need volume because it had already decided that whatever it was saying would be listened to. He had 3 rules that everyone who worked for or around him understood without being told. He did not explain himself, he did not repeat himself, and he did not forgive. He lived in the house on Via Serrano alone, except for the staff, Pharaoh, who managed everything operational. A cook named Blas who came 3 days a week, a driver named Tomas who waited. And Celia, who arrived at 6 and left at 4:30 and moved through his rooms so quietly that sometimes he forgot she was there, until he turned a corner and found a window she had just cleaned, the glass still faintly warm from her cloth. A smell of vinegar and something faint and clean that he had come to associate specifically with her presence in a room. He had never spoken more than 11 words to her consecutively. He knew this because he had, at some point in the last several months, started noticing. On the second shelf of his study, behind a row of legal binders, there was a photograph in a silver frame that he never looked at directly but never moved. It was a photograph of a woman and a girl who was about 14 in the picture and a boy who was about 10. The woman was laughing. The girl was looking off to one side at something outside the frame. The boy was looking at the camera with an expression of such serious, concentrated trust that anyone who saw it would feel, immediately, that they had witnessed something they were not supposed to. The boy was Dominic. The woman was his mother. The girl was his sister, Renata. Renata had been dead for 16 years. She had died in a city 400 miles southeast of here, in a situation that Dominic had spent the first 3 years afterward trying to fix, and the next 13 years afterward trying not to think about, with uneven success. He thought about it on Sundays, when the house was quiet and Celia wasn't there, and the rooms had the particular quality of stillness that only empty houses have, not peaceful, but waiting. He had not meant to read the letter. He had meant to set it on Celia's cleaning cart when she arrived and say nothing, or to hand it to Pharaoh and let him deal with it. Or, and this was the version he returned to most honestly in the hours afterward, to put it back exactly as he had found it, the fold and all, and pretend the whole thing had not happened. But he had picked it up a second time, at 7:03, while his espresso was still hot, and he had told himself he was only looking to see if there was an address, some way to ensure it was delivered to the right person, some practical justification for the action. The handwriting was small and very precise. The letters were formed with the careful deliberateness of someone who had learned to write in a second language and was still, even now, treating each word as a thing that required attention. Celia, I don't have much time to write this. He checks the phone now every night. I am hiding this with the woman downstairs who said she will mail it. Please do not call. If you call, he will know. I need you to understand something. I am not okay. I have not been okay for a long time, but I did not want to worry you because I know what you are doing, and I know what it costs you, and I did not want to be one more thing. That was the first line. That was the line Dominic read, and then put the letter down and left the room. He stood in the hallway for 43 seconds. He could hear the house, the ventilation, the distant sound of traffic on Via Serrano, a bird somewhere outside doing something ordinary and indifferent. He went back into the laundry room and picked up the letter and read the rest of it. It took him 4 minutes. When he was finished, his face had not changed. His expression was exactly what it always was, composed, still, the flat gray of a lake in November. But his left hand, which was resting on the top of the dryer, had closed into a fist so tightly that the knuckle of his index finger had gone white. He read the letter again, slower this time. Then he folded it precisely along its original crease, placed it back in the envelope, and put it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Celia arrived at 6 that morning, 3 minutes later than usual, because the bus had stopped for 4 minutes at the Ortega Street light, and she had stood holding the rail and watching the minutes tick over on her phone with the particular anxiety of someone for whom being 3 minutes late was not a small thing. She let herself in through the side entrance and stood for a moment in the mudroom, taking off her coat. She noticed immediately that her shoe was where she had left it the night before, beside the dryer, though she had the vague feeling that something about it was slightly off. The angle, maybe, or something about the way the light hit it. But she had a full day ahead of her, and Pilar had a school recital on Thursday that she needed to find an appropriate dress for, and her back ached from the sofa bar, and she told herself she was imagining things. She worked through the east wing. She changed the linens in the 2 guest rooms that were never used by guests. She cleaned the large bathroom with the marble floor, working in the precise methodical pattern she had developed over 11 months. North wall, east wall, south wall, floor, fixtures, chrome fittings last because chrome showed everything. She polished the mirror until it gave back a reflection that was perfectly clear, perfectly honest, and then she looked at herself in it for exactly 1 second before moving on. She was in the 2nd guest room, tucking the corner of a fitted sheet with both hands, when she heard footsteps in the hallway. She knew his footsteps. She had not meant to learn them, but you could not be in a house for 11 months without learning which sounds belonged to it. His were slow and very even, not careful exactly, but deliberate. The footsteps of someone who had decided where he was going before he started walking. He stopped in the doorway of the guest room. She straightened and turned. "Good morning," she said. She said this every morning. He usually did not respond or responded with a slight inclination of his head that functioned as acknowledgement without warmth. This morning he looked at her for a moment with those still, deep-set eyes and then said, "When you have a moment." She followed him to the study. He sat in the chair behind the desk. He didn't tell her to sit, which was fine because there was no chair on her side of the desk. She stood with her hands loosely at her sides and waited. He reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and placed the envelope on the desk between them. The world turned very slightly on its axis. She looked at the envelope and then looked at him, and her face did the thing faces do when a person is trying very hard not to show the thing that is happening inside them. It went very still, very careful, the stillness of an animal in an open field that has just heard something in the grass. "I found it this morning," he said. "It had fallen out." He paused. "I read it." She said nothing. She was looking at the envelope. "I read it twice," he said. The room was very quiet. Outside, a truck was moving slowly along Via Serrano, and the sound of its engine was low and steady and grew, and then faded. "How long?" he said. She looked up. "How long what?" "How long has she been with him?" Celia's jaw moved slightly. Something in her throat moved. 3 years, she said. Her voice was level. The levelness of it cost something. "The money you're saving," he said, not a question. "To bring her here." Her eyes went to the window. "I have $214. I need about $1,400 for the transport and the first month, and for—" She stopped. She looked back at him. "I'm sorry about the letter. I know it's not appropriate to have personal." "Stop," he said, quiet, absolute. She stopped. He was looking at the envelope. His left hand was resting on the desk, perfectly still. "Who is he?" he said. "The man." She told him. She told him the name and the city and the street and the color of the house. She told him these things in a flat voice that she held steady by pressing her back molars together very slightly, a thing she had learned to do in the last 3 years when she talked about this, because if she did not do that her voice would shake, and she did not want her voice to shake in front of this man. He listened. He did not write anything down. He did not nod. He sat in complete stillness and listened, and when she finished he said, "All right." "All right," she said. He looked at her. "Go back to work, Mrs. Varga." She went back to work. For 3 days, nothing happened. Or rather, nothing that Celia could see happened. She cleaned the east wing and the west wing and the kitchen and the formal dining rooms that were never used, and she tucked corners and polished chrome and stood in front of mirrors for exactly 1 second before moving on. She did not speak to Dominic except to say good morning, which he now responded to with a word, "Morning," said low and without ceremony, which was more than he had said before. On the 4th day, Pharaoh appeared in the doorway of the kitchen while she was cleaning the stovetop and said, "He wants to see you." She wiped her hands on the cloth and went to the study. Dominic was standing this time, which was unusual. He was standing at the window looking out at the garden, his hands in his pockets. He did not turn around when she came in. "Your sister left that house 2 days ago," he said. The stovetop cloth was still in her hand. She looked at it. She looked at the back of his head. "I'm sorry." "She's in Merida. There's a woman there named SRA, Gutierrez, who runs a placement agency, which is a legitimate business, and who also does other things, which are less legitimate but which I find useful on occasion." He turned from the window. "She will be on a bus to the border crossing at Nogales on Saturday morning. There are people on both sides of the crossing who know what to do. She will arrive in this city on Monday afternoon." Celia's hand tightened around the cloth. "There's a 2-bedroom apartment on Fortunato Street," he said. "It's been empty for 8 months. The rent is $420 per month. There's a school 3 blocks from it, which I understand is relevant." He looked at her. "Your daughter." "Yes," Celia said. Her voice had gone very thin, not fragile thin, like light through gauze. "She's 8. He nodded slightly. "The first 3 months are handled. After that, the rent is your arrangement." He picked up a piece of paper from the desk and held it out to her. "The address." She crossed the room and took the paper. Her hand was steady. She was very concentrated on keeping it steady. "I haven't taken anything from your wages," he said. "None of this comes from your wages." She looked at the paper, then she looked at him. "Why?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the window, then at the second shelf of bookcases behind his desk. He did not look at the photograph in the silver frame, but he was aware of it in the specific way you are aware of something you are deliberately not looking at. "I had a sister," he said. He said it the way people say things that have been inside them for a very long time, in a voice that is not quite the same as their regular voice, lower and slower, and with a quality of weight to it, as if the words themselves are heavier than other words. He did not say anything else. She did not ask anything else. She folded the piece of paper along a careful crease and put it in her pocket and went back to the kitchen and stood at the stovetop for a moment with her hand on the cold burner and her eyes closed. And then she picked up the cloth and finished cleaning. Marisol Varga arrived on a Monday afternoon in the last week of October, on a bus that was 40 minutes late and smelled of diesel, and the particular brand of air freshener that Celia would later be unable to smell without feeling the return of something she couldn't quite name. She was thinner than in the photograph Celia kept on the nightstand, the photograph that was 4 years old from before. She was 23, but she looked older in some ways and younger in others, the way people look when they have been inside something difficult for a long time and have just been let out of it. She had a bruise on her left forearm that was fading from purple into yellow, and she was wearing a jacket that was too big for her. And when she saw Celia standing on the sidewalk outside the station, she stopped walking and put both hands over her mouth. Pilar was standing beside her mother. She was looking at this woman she had only ever seen in photographs with the serious attention of an 8-year-old processing something large and important. Marisol looked at Pilar. She crouched down to her level and said, "You have your mother's eyes." And Pilar, who was not usually a child who showed emotion quickly, put her arms around Marisol's neck and held on. They walked to the apartment on Fortunato Street. The building was clean and had an elevator that worked. The apartment had 2 bedrooms and a kitchen with white tile and a window above the sink that looked out at a row of marigolds that someone had planted in the window box of the apartment across the alley. There was a drawing on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet that said Chicago, a drawing in crayon of 3 people, 2 tall and 1 small, holding hands. Pilar had made it the day before and asked her mother if she could put it up. Under the drawing, in Pilar's handwriting, "My family." Marisol stood in the kitchen and looked at the drawing for a long time. Then she opened the window above the sink to let in the cold October air and stood there breathing it, and Celia stood beside her, and they were quiet together in the way that only people who have been through long distances together can be quiet. He heard about it from Pharaoh, who heard about it from Tomas, who had driven Celia to the bus station because it was raining and her regular bus was running late, and Pharaoh had made a decision about it without being asked. Dominic was in the study when Pharaoh told him. He was reviewing contracts. He looked up when Pharaoh mentioned the drawing on the refrigerator. Tomas had apparently accompanied Celia and her sister to the apartment to help carry things, because Pharaoh had made a decision about that too, and Tomas was not a sentimental man, but he had mentioned the drawing specifically. Dominic looked at the wall for a moment. Then he looked back at the contracts. "Send the apartment management company the next 6 months," he said. "Not 3. 6, Pharaoh said. "Yes." Pharaoh left. Dominic sat for a moment looking at the contract in his hand without reading it. Then he put it down and picked up his phone and called a number he had not called in many years. The phone rang 6 times. A man answered. "I need information on a man in Hermosillo," Dominic said. "Name is Cabral, first name Marco. He's been hurting a woman. He needs to be given a very clear understanding of what will happen if he ever looks for her." The man on the phone said something. "I don't need him dead," Dominic said. He paused. "Just educated." He ended the call and sat very still for a moment, his hand resting on the phone. Then he looked at the bookshelf, at the second shelf. He did not look at the photograph directly, but he could see it, Renata looking off to one side at something outside the frame. He had always wondered what she had been looking at. He had never known. He had asked their mother once, years later, and she had said she couldn't remember. He thought about that now. He thought about the things that get lost, and the things that, occasionally, with enough time and the right kind of attention, don't. Celia continued working at the house on Via Serrano. The work was the same. The east wing, the west wing, the kitchen, the chrome fixtures. She still arrived at 6 and left at 4:30. She still wore her navy blouse and her gray blouse and her pale green blouse with the thinned spot above the pocket, though she had bought a 4th blouse now, a dark burgundy one that she wore on Fridays. What was different was this. The house no longer felt like a place she was moving through. It felt, slightly and without drama, like a place she was allowed to be in. She found a cup of coffee waiting on the kitchen counter one morning in November, already made. Exactly as she drank it, she had not told anyone how she drank her coffee. It was simply there. She stood and looked at it for a moment and then picked it up and drank it and went to work. In December, Pilar's school sent home a flyer about a winter concert. Pilar had been given a speaking part, 7 lines, which she had been practicing every night in the kitchen while Marisol cooked and Celia sat at the table checking the time. Pilar wanted a specific dress, red with a white collar. Celia had been looking for one in her size for 2 weeks. On the morning of December 9th, Celia arrived to find a wrapped box on the cleaning cart. No note, no name. A child's dress red with a white collar in a size 8. She stood in the laundry room holding the box. She could hear the house doing its ordinary things. The ventilation, the windows, the particular creak of the floorboard in the hallway near the study that she had learned to step around. She put the box down carefully and looked at it for a moment. She went to the study. She knocked, which she had never done before. He said, "Come in," and she opened the door and stood in the doorway and said, "Thank you." He was reading. He looked up. He looked at her for a moment with those still, deep-set eyes, and then he looked back at his book. "Close the door on your way out," he said. She closed the door. She went back to work, and the day moved forward the way days do when they are carrying something inside them that has no name yet, but will have one eventually, slowly, carefully, like hands holding water. Pilar wore the red dress with the white collar to the winter concert on December 12th. She said her 7 lines without missing a single word, in a voice that was clear and steady, and carried to the back of the auditorium, which held 240 people, 3 of whom were Celia and Marisol, who were sitting in the 4th row holding each other's hands, and one man in a dark coat who sat in the last row on the aisle and left before the lights came up. Tomas was parked outside. He had driven without being asked. On the refrigerator in the apartment on Fortunato Street, the drawing of 3 people holding hands was still there, still held up by the magnet that said Chicago. But beside it now, added by Pilar on the morning of December 13th, was a second drawing. In this one there were 4 people. 3 were labeled Mama, Tia Mari, Pilar in her careful 2nd-grade handwriting. The 4th person was drawn slightly apart from the group, slightly taller than the others, and was not labeled. But Pilar had given him a coat, a dark one, and she had given him hands, and his hands were open. If this story moved something in you, if it made you think of the people who showed up for you without explanation, without asking for anything in return, without ever letting you know the full cost of what it took, then you already understand what this story was really about. It was not about power. It was not about crime or redemption or the strange grace of violent men. It was about a letter in a shoe, a first line that undid something. A man who had failed to save one woman and spent 16 years paying a debt that could never be repaid. Until the morning a piece of paper fell out of a worn black flat on a laundry room floor and gave him one moment, one precise opportunity, to do something that mattered. He took it. He didn't announce it. He didn't explain it. He did it and went back to his contracts and his cold espresso and his study with its second shelf and its silver frame and the photograph he never looked at directly. That is the kind of change that is real. It doesn't announce itself. It shows up on a refrigerator. It shows up in a cup of coffee already made. It shows up in a drawing of a man with open hands. If this story stayed with you, hit the like button. It helps more people find stories like this one. Tell me in the comments which moment hit you hardest. Was it the letter, the dress, or the drawing at the end? I want to know. And on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate this story? Drop your number below. Subscribe if you haven't already, and share this with someone who needs to hear a story about someone choosing to show up. I'll see you in the next one.